Thanks for joining the Atman Show and have a very special guest, Subhash Kak sir. He's a Padma Shri awardee, and I have done many episodes on this podcast. Previously, we did an episode on ancient universities, and today we are going to talk about all ancient rishis, the kind of mathematical algorithm they gave to the world, and also something related to medicine, grammar, and things like that. So yeah, so sir, can you go ahead and give a brief introduction about the topic before we start on the slides?
Thank you, Anamika. Indian science and mathematics has not entered the general modern consciousness to the extent it ought to, because research over the last 100 years or so has revealed that the foundations of world mathematics are to be found in their Indian origins. For example, if you look at geometry, you look at the Pythagoras theorem, it was already there in India for centuries. And of course, there's also the story that Pythagoras himself came to India in search of knowledge. And these stories used to be neglected or ignored. And likewise, if you look at mathematics, of course, everybody knows about the number zero. And modern scientific revolution, which goes back to calculus and infinite series, that also happened in India centuries before its corresponding rise in Europe. So this is a great subject, and everybody ought to become aware of it, that India has played a central role in the rise of science in the world. And so that is something that we should be aware of in our consciousness.
Okay, so let's move on to our first slide. Our first slide is about the Sulba Sutras developed by Bodhayan and Apstamba, and later, followed by Pythagoras. So, can you throw some light on this slide?
Okay, the Shulba Sutras. The Shulba Sutras were about use of rajju, and as you can see in the Sanskrit, rajju means rope, to sketch out the altars on the ground. The altars were needed in order to represent certain information and in order to make transformation, for example, of one area into another, a circle into a square, and so on. And likewise, for this, it was necessary to have a theorem which connects the length of the base and the vertical to the diagonal. And that is what the Bodhayan theorem is, which now in the West is called the Pythagoras theorem. But right now, I'm very glad to know that in the latest books, NCERT books in India, they are using the name Bodhayan Pythagoras theorem, which is a progress from what was there before.
Okay, thank you, sir. Moving on to our next slide. Um, Zero, place value, Aryabhatta and Brahmagupta. So I think the Aryabhatta and Brahmagupta, they exist in different times, right? And Brahmagupta adopted from Aryabhatta. Is it something like that?
Well, in fact, if you stay in BCE, before Common Era, right? Common Era is 2000 years ago. And if you stay in BCE, there was not just the Shulba Sutras, which go back to at least 800 BCE, as we saw in Bodhayan's case, and there were other Shulba Sutras also by Apastamba and others. There was also astronomy, and Vedanga Jyotish is the astronomy of the Vedic times, which has an internal clock of 1300 BC. And how do you know what the internal date is? That is determined by pointing to the different star clusters, because they keep on shifting with time. There is a precession of the Earth, which has a cycle of 26,000 years. So if you look at the specific mention of certain astronomical events in Vedanga Jyotish, it points to about 1300 BCE. There are other events in Shatapatha Brahman and in the Rig Veda, which go back to 2000 BC or even 3000 BC. So clearly, it's a very, very ancient tradition, which is something that has not been generally recognized because people say, hey, the latest Padapatha of Rig Veda is 1000, but that's just made up. There is no basis that was just to force fit the chronology of the Sanskrit text to this assumed date of 1500 BC for the coming of the Aryans, etc., which is totally wrong. No basis to it. So, in any event, in the early centuries of CE, you had the great astronomer Aryabhatta, whose date of birth is 499 CE, and Brahmagupta. And Brahmagupta, of course, has the first algebraic rules for the use of zero. Now, there was no zero in Europe or anywhere else, and the evidence for zero comes in from certain inscriptions. And one of the earliest is in Southeast Asia because these were Indian scholars or travelers who were visiting Southeast Asia. And in Gwalior, there's an inscription in a temple in Gwalior. I believe it's about 400 CE. But in an article many, many years ago, I argued that about 2000 years ago, the idea of shunya became very powerful in Indian philosophy. As you know, the concept of shunyata, for example, and I argued that that must have corresponded to the time that the use of zero became common. Shunya is zero, of course. And so, if you accept that argument, 2000 years ago, but certainly Brahmagupta, great mathematician, he gave specific rules of how to multiply and add and subtract, including zero, which was not a part of the mathematics of other civilizations.
Okay, so how Brahmagupta was different from Aryabhatta? What did he do more than Aryabhatta?
Aryabhatta had his couple of Siddhantas, two texts, where he spoke about his astronomy. One of them is called Aryabhatiya, while Brahmagupta wrote much larger texts, two other texts. Brahmagupta probably operated in more of Central or West India, and Aryabhatta was probably more in the east. We don't quite
Oh,
know exactly where, there were many universities, one forgets.
mm-hmm,
India was dotted with universities, with
mm-hmm,
educational centers.
mm-hmm.
And so they were at different places. And what's very interesting is that uh, many scholars and others, there is a tradition, popular tradition, that Aryabhatta could have been from South India because his tradition remained alive in South India. After some time, it didn't have the same, um, follow up in India. Because what does follow up mean? After the universities were destroyed with the coming of the Islamic invasions, scholarship lived on in families. And the families which followed Aryabhatta lived on in South India and in Kerala. So this is connected to the Aryabhatta tradition. And some people have assumed that to mean that maybe Aryabhatta himself was from Kerala, but I don't think there's any evidence in support of that.
Do you think this Kerala schools, which you're going to cover in the next slide, is it because of the Aryabhatta?
Yeah, the Kerala school sees itself as a successor to Aryabhatta's mathematics and his
Mhm.
tradition.
Okay.
But as I mentioned, that is because the family in which this knowledge resided, um, it came somewhere from north of Kerala, but then it settled in Kerala. And so they were connected to it. But that doesn't mean that
Mhm.
they were biologically connected to Aryabhatta. For some reason,
Yeah.
this is what they took as their ideal to use mathematics in the way Aryabhatta had used it. Now, Brahmagupta's is much more general, and so Kerala school did not claim that it was following Brahmagupta because Brahmagupta gave general mathematics, some very sophisticated algebraic theorems, and his and his Siddhantas, astronomical Siddhantas, and both Aryabhatta and Brahmagupta's Siddhantas went west to Iraq, to Baghdad, and so on, and they became a part of or foundation of Arabic astronomy, which in turn became a foundation of the later European astronomy. So these are the granddaddies of modern astronomy, both Aryabhatta and Brahmagupta. Brahmagupta is also the granddaddy of modern mathematics because he was the first person to speak, as you mentioned in your slide, systematic rules for arithmetic with zeros and negatives, which did not exist. Now, just remember, just think of this. Brahmagupta, about 1400 years ago, shows clearly how negative numbers should be used in equations and elsewhere, right? It took Europe about 300 years to accept negative numbers. From 1100 to 1400, there was a big fight over it because the church said negative numbers are from the devil. It became a kind of a theological issue when it was so clear and so straightforward done in Brahmagupta's texts. So it took Europe quite some time to actually integrate this in their own thinking.
Yeah, thank you, sir. That's an helpful insight. So yeah, we were talking about Kerala school. So in like, is it more famous? Kerala school is more famous for calculus, right? Is it? Am I correct?
Right. Modern scientific revolution is traced back. What's the difference between modern science and pre-modern science? The claim is, and scholars accept it, that modern science is based on calculus because before that you can only add numbers. Now you can add areas, volumes, and that opened up an entire world which was not accessible to scientists prior to that. So you needed infinite series because when you're summing up a surface or a volume, it can be viewed as consisting of an infinite sum of small areas or small volumes. So the whole history or historiography um, has disputed or has discussed this question: when did this happen? And it's generally traced to Newton and Leibniz in Europe about 400 years ago. But in reality, in Kerala school, infinite series were already a part of their math 200 or 300 years prior to its development in Europe, say by Newton and Leibniz. So now people have tried to argue or tried to analyze or investigate how might this have happened. And what's come to light is that after Vasco da Gama came to India, whenever 1490s or whenever, the church sent many smart people to India and there is evidence of it. It's very well understood, and these were people who knew mathematics or who wanted to learn mathematics. These were the so-called Jesuits. Jesuit was a uh, group within the church which were interested in intellectual leadership. So some of the Jesuits were sent to India, and after they studied in India, they went back, and then the Pope set up a commission to reform, for example, the European calendar at that time had serious flaws, and so the argument has been made that the Kerala school the Kerala calculus, was then adopted and spread to mathematicians all across Europe, and that's what gave rise to the scientific revolution. There's another element to it, which is the Newton is famous not just for his infinite series, but also for his laws of motion. Three laws of motion, right? An object stays on in its state of rest or motion, or if you push something, that leads to acceleration. The third one is to every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So these are the three laws of motion, which Newton wrote in his famous book, The Principia. And but now it's come to light that these three laws of motion were already there in Indian mathematics going back to Kannada, which is 500 BCE, in about the same form. So the case can be made that a modern Western um, revolution in science, or the modern revolution in science, which took place, say, 300-400 years ago, was on the back of Indian mathematics and Indian physics,
Okay. So yeah, again the same famous Karya Virodhi Karman to each and
which
every
is the
action
third
as
law of motion.
equal
Which is
and
the
opposite
third law of
action.
motion.
Yeah,
Absolutely. We did discuss it in an
yeah, yeah.
earlier
We have a
episode.
separate episode. Yes. So basically, this rishis Madhava, Parameshwara, and Nilakanta, and these are all from Kerala school.
They are all from Kerala schools and they wrote their texts. And now they were even wrote these infinite series expansion. And now some of the Western names are being replaced by adding on Neelakanta's name or and adding on Madhava's name. As generally happens, you
Mm-hmm.
change nomenclature, at least in certain circles, that has happened. For example, I recently wrote a paper using infinite series in biology,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the most powerful mathematical objects that is used in a variety of applications is the so-called Fibonacci series.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
So
We
now,
use it in our work also. Yeah,
absolutely. So
yeah.
Fibonacci series was done by Mr. Fibonacci, who
Mm.
translated Indian mathematics, and but 400 or 500 years prior to him, this series was already described in all its details by Virahanka. So,
Veerahanka. Okay.
yeah, in my paper, so I call it VF series, Virahanka Fibonacci series. And it went
Mhm.
through the reviewers, etc. They said perfectly fine. And so it's been published. It just came out a
Okay.
few months ago. Yeah.
Okay. Great. So that's a good news. Okay. Moving on to our next slide. Algebra and number theory, Brahmagupta's theorem and equation. Can we talk about that?
See, Brahmagupta's work was truly very, very influential because of the clarity with which he described the rules of mathematics. And then he solved some very intricate formulas related to number theory. Uh, in number theory, you're looking at properties of numbers, or primes, or this or that, or solving certain properties related to what happens if you're looking for a solution to a certain relationship between numbers. So he did that very well. And often there was a basis, a application basis for the posing of those problems, right? Now, this application could be abstract, or it could be related to a physical background, a physical context. So, since he provided these rules, the algorithmic rules very clearly, this had influence, and this is what uh, led to the term algorithm. Algorithm, of course, is an Arabic term, but what it really means is a procedure, a clear procedure. So these procedures, which were described by Brahmagupta, and there were similar procedures described by Aryabhatta in his book. In fact, uh, some of us many years ago even started using the phrase Aryabhatta algorithm. And if you Google it, you'll find that some modern papers have been written using the phrase Aryabhatta algorithm. In fact, my colleagues and I have used that phrase before. And likewise, the rules developed by Brahmagupta gave Philip or gave encouragement to others to find other procedures. So, what was a sutra in Sanskrit? Sutra, of course, means a thread. What was a sutra, a procedure, became the Arabs called, and the Arabs call it, the Arabs called mathematics Hindasa, or the numbers Hindasa, meaning Indian numbers, Hind numbers. And then when they translated Brahmagupta's and Aryabhatta's mathematics, I forget the name of the individual, and that's how the term algorithm came. And now, of course, it's basic to all of computer science or procedures in modern sciences, whether it's biology or physics.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Moving on to cosmology and astronomy, Vedanga, and again Aryabhatta. Yeah.
Okay, we mentioned Vedanga Jyotish, and we mentioned how its inner date is about 1400 BCE.
Mhm.
Now, see what happened was because the West got, or Western scholars, there were two kinds. There were those who were looking at data much more dispassionately, objectively, and they noted all these facts that Vedanga Jyotish has an inner date of 1400, 1300 or 1400 BCE, or Shatpat Brahman has 2000 BC, etc., etc. But there were certain others who wanted to uh, develop a, a chronology within a overarching understanding of their own dates. And there the problem was that the Christian or Judeo-Christian tradition looked at the creation of the universe in 4004 BCE. So they wanted to fit everything into this 4004 BCE, and for some time, even smart scientists in the West thought of so until the rise of geology in the 19th century. As geology arose, they discovered that these rocks were much more ancient, million years old, when you go to wherever, all parts of the world. And so this 4004 BCE could not be true. But in the beginning, before the rise of geology, and astronomy. So they tried to force fit these dates into a short chronology going back to 4004 BCE. And that's what has created a lot of complications in people understanding uh, the rise of ideas. And so they said, no, Vedanga Jyotish is probably, it couldn't be. Indians could not have known that in 1300 BC, so maybe it's only 500 BC. So this is how they did. Okay, maybe it's only such and such. But clearly, you have to use logic. It's like earlier they said Aryan invasion theory, people invaded. There were people from Central Asia who came in huge, maybe on their chariots, and then they conquered India and they replaced the population. But things are not as simple as that. People come in, a few hundred people come in, and this is the most densely populated region in the world, India was. People just suddenly don't give up their population, give up their language, right? And in
Mm.
fact, there is continuity in all traditions. So you don't replace, you don't just give up your language just like that. And now, of course, it's easier for people to lose their language because you have communications, media, etc., etc. You have
Mm.
powerful forces at work. But that's not what the case was in 1500 BCE. So all these bizarre theories were adopted, and they led to a huge misunderstanding of many elements of Indian science.
Yeah, and
In
this
fact,
Aryan invasion theory is actually rejected now. That's what I
yeah.
heard. Yeah.
It's totally rejected by almost everybody, but now
Mm.
they say Aryan migration theory. So the whole idea there is people migrated, on the men came and then they
Yeah.
married local women. Okay, if men came and they're fighting all the time, why would local women switch to the language of their husbands?
Yeah.
Of the men? The
Yeah.
language of the women will stay on, right?
Yeah.
When people are using, I have this theory that in almost all areas, whether we are talking of the general structures in society or in science, 80% of the people are sort of crazy. They're prepared to believe in anything. You can give them anything. You can tell them, whatever. You can even, as was the case 3 or 4 years ago, that okay, any man can also have babies. In
Yeah.
fact, just last week there was a hearing
Mm,
uh, in the Congress
mm-hmm,
where this Indian doctor of Indian origin doctor
mm,
uh, would not answer the question, can men have babies? She would
mm,
not refuse. She wouldn't say, no, men can't have babies
mm,
because of the, it's the dogma. No, you are supposed to say that both men and women can have babies. It's crazy. That's all you can
mm.
say.
Okay, thank you, sir. Moving on to our next slide. So basically, if we covered, like, we can just summarize it, like Bodhayan did Pythagoras and Apastamba did geometric. Kanada, we already talked about atomic theory. We can talk about Aryabhat, we can talk about Shushruta, Charaka. These two we didn't talk about. So we can talk
Correct.
about Shushruta and Charaka.
When you come to medicine,
Mm-hmm.
you have Charak and Sushruta. Now, Charaka also means, the itinerant, the physicians who moved from one place, from Char. Char means to move. So it was a name used by many physicians, and so there is the Charak Samhita and there is the Sushrut Samhita. They are very similar to each other, but Sushrut also has stuff on surgery, much more stuff on surgery than Charak has. Now, how do you date all of these? Well, there is medicine described in Atharva Veda. How old is Atharva Veda? If you use the 4004 BCE creation of the universe chronology, then Atharva Veda is dated to maybe 1000 BCE. Otherwise, it's much older. So you have that, and then early texts of Charak Samhita, when there was intense um, interaction between India and Central Asia in the early centuries of CE, because these Sanskrit texts were being taken and translated into Chinese. At that time, and these texts have been discovered in caves, etc., in Central Asia. So we know we can now date it. Here is Charak Samhita, certain such chapters which were found in this cave, and that cave is 200 CE. So you know that's prior to that. So, so you had a discussion or investigation with a proper description of the whole structure, and this structure goes back to the earliest layers of Sanskrit text, which is where, for example, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, amongst all the rishis, I am Kapil. And who is Kapil? Kapil is the creator of or the originator of the Sankhya system, the Sankhya Darshan. And Sankhya speaks about Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. The three aspects of reality, and those are fundamental to medicine. See, the medicine. Likewise, you have three doshas, right? You have the pitta, kapha, and vata. Vata is air, pitta is fire, and kapha is water, right? You have these three, which are similar to what we have in the Sankhya darshan. And so the foundations go back very early. And in in the Puranas, there is mention of Samudra Manthan. In Samudra Manthan, at some point, Dhanvantari, who is supposed to have been the very first physician, he comes with this Amrit Ghata, the pitcher of Amrit. So Dhanvantari is supposed to be the very first physician. So there is in the Charak Samhita and Sushrut Samhita, there is mention of a whole sequence of physicians, of early Rishi physicians, going back to Dhanvantari and Agnivesha and so on and so forth. And so people have held on to it, and in many ways, and that's my claim, the foundational Ayurveda is superior to allopathy. Why? Because Ayurveda speaks of a balance in the body, right? You speaks of wellness. How do you keep a person well? So if the balance is disturbed, then you do either through internal effort or sometimes with a necessary outside effort, which is a medication or whatever else might be required to bring it back to balance. There's no such concept in Western medicine. Allopathy, the meaning of the term allopathy is to treat a symptom. So allopathy is, you say I have a pain, so you do something or you give a medication which will create most cases its own side effects. So fundamentally, Ayurveda is superior. It has a viewed three-way logic, while Western medicine is based on binary logic, right? And that's why Western medicine right now, as we all know, is facing a huge crisis. 80-90% of the medications don't work. Most people are sick. People in America take so many medications, and they are medicating themselves. And there's a more fundamental mathematical reason, which is that three-way logic is superior to binary logic. In fact, I
Yeah.
have a new book coming out on it in 2 months, in 2nd April, published by Chapman and Hall. It's called The E-Dimensionality Principle with applications to various fields,
So this
where
E, is it will it talk about Ayurveda? What will this E dimension?
it mentions Ayurveda in passing. It does mention Ayurveda, cosmology,
Mm,
physics. It discusses every subject. And E is 2.7. So
mm-hmm.
what is optimal is 2.7, which is close to 3. So
Yeah,
3 is logically optimal, 2 is not. So if you base your societal structures on 2, you will not be operating in an optimal fashion.
optimal.
And that is where I'm hoping that this book will have lessons for everybody.
So you mean three means like length, breadth, and height. That's three.
Um,
Is
in when you're looking of space, when you're talking of space, length,
yeah,
breadth, and height. But
yeah.
when you're talking of the body,
Hmm.
there have to be. It can't be just well and not well. There have got to
Okay.
be three. There's got to be triangular stuff inside the body also, and
Is
that
it like
triangular,
Vata, Pitta, and Kapha? Like is it, you can relate
absolutely,
it to length,
absolutely.
breadth, and height. Okay.
Vata,
Yeah.
Pitta, and Kapha. Right,
Okay.
absolutely. These are
Mm.
the three. These are the three dimensions to
Mm.
health. Just
Okay.
like length, breadth, and height are the
Yeah.
three dimensions to a physical body.
Mm-hmm. So then how does it curl up to less than 3, 2.67?
2.71.
Oh, sorry, 2.71. Okay, yeah.
Okay, there is a mathematical theorem which says that 2.71, which is, close to 3, closer to 3 than to 2,
Mm.
that 2.718 is optimal. And
Okay.
my argument is the
Mm-hmm.
argument on which this book is based, the argument is that everything in nature is optimal.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what the nature of space should be.
Mm-hmm.
And possibly, why do objects fall? Because the dimensions are not exactly three. So the source of gravitation itself could be this aspect of reality.
Okay.
So that's the argument I make.
So keep me updated. When your book comes, we'll do an episode on that.
The book is coming out on 2nd April. It's already on Amazon, of course. But
Uh-huh.
certainly we should talk about it because I think it's very important. It's
Yeah.
important if space is not three-dimensional because we all believe our mind says it's three-dimensional, but
Yeah.
if in reality it's not, that's a big deal, right? We should miss at least one night of
Actually,
sleep.
you are saying, I'll give an, based on what have gathered, like you are saying three is optimal and you're somehow saying it is less than three, 2.87 or how, whatever, right? But I've heard that is fourth dimensional and there is Shambhala and then, there's one city there where
Oh,
Kalki will be born.
I see. Okay. That that is a separate thing altogether. As
Yeah.
you know,
Huh.
with relativity theory, you said there are three dimensions of physical space and one dimension of time, which is true. There is also
Okay.
time, right?
Okay.
The
Yeah.
space transforms itself
Mm.
across time.
Mhm.
And then people have said, well, maybe there are other dimensions related to imagination.
Okay.
So that is one thing. But here I'm talking of hard physical reality. What I'm
Okay.
saying is that hard physical reality is in fact
Mhm.
2.718. which is
Mm-hmm.
close to 3. So we can roughly say it's 3,
Three.
2.718. And
Mm-hmm.
certainly, as far as medicine is concerned, because I published a whole series of papers recently, as
Mm-hmm.
recently as 2025, showing how we can understand the nature of the genetic code if
Mm-hmm.
we approach that from the perspective of e-dimensionality. And that's also a part of the book.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, sir. So I've heard a lot about Surya Siddhanta. So can you little bit briefly touch on that, and this Maya and Maya Sur, and even those kind of character. And I've heard that even UK has actually acknowledged the book Surya Siddhanta. So how, I don't know how far it's true that, but can you touch upon that?
There were many Siddhantas which are current. There was the
Yes.
Aryabhat tradition, there was Brahma Sput Siddhanta, which went to the west, which is the Brahmagupta tradition. And after that, you also had Bhaskaracharya's, his Siddhanta. And Bhaskaracharya, about 1100 something, also spoke about gravitation in modern terms. He said, every object will attract other objects. They fall not just from the perspective of Earth. So there were many, many Siddhantas. Now, one Siddhanta which was current in all these centuries was Surya Siddhanta.
Mm-hmm.
Surya Siddhanta was there even during Aryabhata's time or
Mm-hmm.
even prior to that. So now, how do you date it? Now, according to historians of astronomy, well, uh, it was something where the various constants were kept on getting modified. So since they were modified even later, we cannot date it to a specific time, specific moment. You see that? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's, in Aryabhata's Siddhanta, Aryabhatiya, or if you look at Brahmagupta, the constants are fixed. So which means that they have not been changed. In Surya Siddhanta, that's apparently not the case. Now, whatever the system in Surya Siddhanta is also the same as Aryabhata or in Brahmagupta's system. But just as even Aryabhata speaks about the solar system and other systems beyond the solar system, and so does Surya Siddhanta. All the Indian Siddhantas acknowledged that there were other systems or universes beyond ours, other solar
You have a
systems.
parallel universe,
Not
multiverse.
parallel. Parallel
Mm.
universe is a different idea. Parallel universe is that it's existent right here.
Uh-huh.
No, no. So
Multiverse.
yeah, those are, I think, the hard. It's impossible to falsify it. A
Mm-hmm.
scientific theory should be falsifiable. So, in
Mm-hmm.
fact, in the Puranas also, you have the Siddhantas, which are
Mm-hmm.
mathematical, astronomical texts. You
Mm-hmm.
have the Puranas also where there is more freewheeling speculation. So, in the
Mm-hmm.
Siddhantas, in the Puranas, it's mentioned that there are other universes and there are any number of infinite number of solar systems. There are and time has many different aspects. As we now seem to know, time in certain Puranic stories, time seems to go much faster at some places than at other places, right? As has been demonstrated by relativity theory. If you get into a ship, into a very fast spaceship, and
Mm-hmm.
come back, your brother or sister would have grown much older than you because you were in a fast spaceship. So time for you would move slowly than for somebody else who didn't move. Did you know about this?
Yes. Time travel. Like, there is a
Time
story.
travel. Right.
Kakudami and Revati. So
Oh,
he wants
absolutely.
to, then he goes to Brahma in the spaceship. Then he says that I cannot find, a suitable groom for my daughter. And then they says that at the time, while you go back, the time has changed and you have to marry Krishna's brother.
Absolutely. So while you were talking to me in
Yeah.
Brahmalok,
Yeah.
so many ages, eons have passed
Yeah.
on Prithvilok, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
time flow varies. So the
Mm,
rishis were aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
in modern science that has come up only very recently,
Mm-hmm.
only after 1905,
Mm-hmm.
after relativity theory, that physics realized that time flow can be different. But rishis were certainly aware of it. Rishis were also aware of the capacity to stop time, which is a consequence of quantum theory. In
Mm-hmm.
quantum theory, if you observe a system, this time evolution of that system stops. In fact, just last year, I wrote a paper for a journal where I argued that by observing oneself, you could slow down the aging process within yourself.
How do you observe? Like looking, no, what do you do? Observe means yoga or something?
Yeah, observe in Sanskrit means to do dhyan. If you do
Meditation.
dhyan on yourself, meditation. Yeah,
Uh,
meditation is a word which has different meanings. Meditation
mm-hmm.
means maybe to think about something, while observe meaning to concentrate so that you have one pointed focus on that thing, and not
Mm-hmm.
certainly not necessarily on ideas, on stories. Meditation also means to think of various stories. You are meditating on your relationship with so and so. In English, you can use that. I'm meditating on my girlfriend or my boyfriend, right? But that's not what dhyan means. Dhyan
Mm-hmm.
means to focus to the on the very essence of being. And so I've
Or maybe
argued,
blank, blank, right? You
yeah,
stare at the
yeah,
blank.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Chitta
Mm,
vritti nirodha. To
mm,
do nirodha, to
mm,
stopping of the vritti, chitta. So that is yoga.
mm,
So dhyan is yoga. To observe is to do yoga. And when you do yoga, you can stop time.
mm-hmm. Oh, when you do yoga, you stop time. Okay.
Yeah, you
That's
stop
so,
aging.
yeah.
You stop the aging process.
So can you talk about this Maya Sura and Maya? Like, can you talk about that?
Oh yeah, yeah. There is in Surya Siddhanta itself that okay, Maya he created certain things, and now there's some people who are jumping off from there and saying that well maybe they were aware of the Maya civilization across the globe, and but I think that is sort of
It's
that
mythical. Okay.
yeah, 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 you can't. So this is Maya could also be, I don't know. I haven't given any more thought etymologically. It's from Maya also means magic, for example, in Sanskrit, right?
You know, also
And
there is one incident, remember in Mahabharata, that he creates the Mayasur, he creates a magic palace, and then
yeah,
when Duryodhan comes into that magic palace, then Draupadi laughs at him because he falls down in an magical palace.
the
Yeah,
water,
yeah.
and the whole story takes off from there. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Maya is also, as we know, the principle which creates this world. That's
Hmm.
Maya, right? And there is Maya Shakti. So maybe this term Maya could have been a takeoff on this very old concept
Okay.
within the Sanskrit tradition of Maya Shakti, because ultimately, what is reality? It's this Shakti of our imagination which gives its structure, right? One can make the argument. It's a very subtle argument, but that is what you have in Surya Siddhanta. So Surya Siddhanta was the general astronomical or Jyotish text in India, which was used for centuries, and and that's the reason why it was so popular all across the country. That's why it was modified by different people as they went along. While Aryabhata or Brahmagupta or Bhaskaras, they remain within their tradition and their numbers were not changed.
Hmm.
So we can take them exactly.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Moving on to our last slide, grammar. I know we talked about Panini. So, but then like looks like Patanjali was older than Panini, right? And
No, no, no,
Katayan.
no, 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 no.
Uh,
Patanjali.
mm,
Now, see the Patanjali. There are three Patanjalis. One is, of course, the Mahabhashya commentary.
mm,
Mahabhashya is the commentary on Panini's Ashtadhyayi, right? One of the
mm,
greatest books ever, most brilliant books ever.
mm,
And Patanjali made it famous.
mm,
But there's also Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, and there's
Mm-hmm.
also Patanjali's contribution to Ayurveda.
Mm-hmm.
Now, within the Indian tradition, it's claimed that there was only one Patanjali, and he did all the three. Not
Okay.
impossible, right? People can do many things, and they are not that disparate. But there are some Western scholars who say no, there were three different Patanjalis.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I don't think there is evidence which compels you to believe that there were three different Patanjalis. And so Patanjali is about 150 BCE. That's
Mm-hmm.
much after Panini. And
Mm-hmm.
so BCE Patanjali Yoga Sutras, therefore, and
Mm-hmm.
of course, yoga was already there
Mm-hmm.
in the Vedic texts and later texts, but Patanjali gave it a certain form in the sutras. The
Mm-hmm.
darshanas like Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, or Sankhya Sutra, or Vaisheshika or Nyaya, etc.
Mm-hmm.
They were formalized by later rishis, but these ideas were already a part of the Vedas.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, sir. It was an amazing session. Do you have anything to say for my viewers of the Atman Show?
Well, this is great. This was a wonderful session. I really enjoyed it, and I think everybody who's interested in India or the world should be aware of all of these facts, because
Yeah.
they open up windows to our own understanding and our own journey to knowing what the world is and what our purpose in this world is.
Okay.
Our purpose, meaning the purpose of our own life, is.
Yeah. Sure. And then next time we'll meet about your book that's on Amazon. And let me actually go through it. Like I have to do some reading myself. Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Namaste.
Okay, namaste, bye.
Bye.